Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I hope this works. Yes, everybody can understand me. Thank you, Mr. Donfried, for your introduction. And first of all, I want to express my admiration for you, Mr. Donfried, and the Institute of Cultural Diplomacy for accomplishing this extraordinary summit. I think I have to take my glasses. Will be better. I'm invited today to share my thoughts on the importance of youth education and development advancement and its positive influences on international relations. Whoever believes in the future and who wants to shape it has to believe in the young people and has to support them. And this could be already the keynote because there's not much to add. But, well, matter of fact, belief is connected to religion, and we agree all that there has to be done more, much more. Before we share our knowledge, we have to share our common values. In an ideal world, this happens in the parental home, and in this case, the parental home in the United States does not differ much from the parental home in China. Parents all over the world want the best for their children, yet not all parents can provide the very best for them for different reasons. And at this point, society and governments have to step in. In my point of view, this starts with vocational and academic education. To quote John F. Kennedy, there is one thing in the long run more expensive than education, no education, end of quote. The German government, for example, has spent within the last 4 years 13 billion for education and research. I could bore you now with what Germany does on domestic level, but this panel is set in a bigger frame. Germany, Europe is challenged to step into an intercultural dialogue, participation in society, and compliance of human rights. The latter one is a very important issue. We all know that there are still countries which have to be strongly reminded of this. And let me put it this way, China and Russia actually are no shining examples. And I think, or better said, I hope, I can go so far without risking diplomatic irritations. And spying on friends, as we just learned through the whistleblower Edward Snowden, contributes, if at all in a technical way, to a conflict prevention. Naturally, the main concern is focused on prevention of criminal offenses. But disclosure of the huge dimension of spying on friends like us is not building up confidence at all. And let me also say or talk about Russia, how they treated the foreign foundations. I know Germany, all the parties have foundations in Russia, and it's not, I think it's 6 months ago that they were treated as foreign agents, and these things are not building up confidence because foundations are a very important instrument for better understanding, for cultural exchange. So, after this short excursion, I will go back to more precise examples of cultural diplomacy, our foreign educational policy, and our partners, such as, of course, the German Welle, Deutsche Welle, German Academic Exchange Service, Institute for Cultural Relations, the Pedagogic Exchange Service, Federal Institute for Vocational Training, and of course, the very well-known Goethe Institute. All these partners contribute to the extension of networks of partner schools as well as to share the German language. The youngest child of this educational network is the International Vocational Training Corporation. Especially our European neighbors have a strong demand on our know-how and experience on our vocational training. It is worldwide recognized, but of course I know it cannot be applied one by one everywhere. But basic elements can be transmitted to different international systems. And the sector budget aid by the German government is a reliable partner to many nations. There's one thing I would like to put special emphasis on. When we talk about education, especially in Europe, especially in my country, we are mentally attached to academic education. But a diverse response is needed, including the recognition of academic and vocational qualifications. Currently, we are working on further integration, for example, through harmonized standards in the European Union for vocational training and academic degrees. A key element in this context is, of course, the mutual recognition of degrees. This is especially important in a world of increasing mobility, and as there was already mentioned, we are all interconnected. And it has to be supported beyond the borders of the European Union. It is unacceptable that we don't recognize, and we still don't, the degrees of highly qualified young people who come to us from around the world. Especially for Germany, my country, we are facing a lack of skilled workers. And that's an enormous challenge for the future. It's caused by the demographic factors, and therefore we have to do something there to open the borders and to recognize mutual recognition of the degrees and the titles. Young people are restless, and they have to be. They also have their own ideas and expectations. Whereas we older folks tend to enhance our standards of living, the younger people tend to change the whole world with their strong sense for justice and equality. And I mean that in a purely positive way, because the youngsters have often been successful with their ideas. But right here, we walk on eggshells. Governments hardly ever tend to be amused about a rebellious youth. And now I want to have a look back in the years 1968 until 1989. What started out with flower power and make love, not war, developed into an anti-Vietnam War protest and reached over to Europe. In France, we witnessed how peaceful demonstrations partly turned into violent unrest and shaped the student movement in Germany as well. And up until here, I have to say, that is some kind of protest that a democratic system has to endure. And young people, I already mentioned it, were successful with their claims and protests on this side of the Atlantic and on the other side as well. But then there was a turning point in Germany. The situation escalated, and out of the student movement, a group of extremists split up. The convenient state characterized by the saturated post-World War society was the enemy for them at that time. In this environment, brutal violence and terrorism were used to fight against the so-called establishment. Murder, hijacking, and pure terror were used against representatives of the state. The communist system of the Soviet Union and China managed apparently to suppress any kind of protest until 1989. We still remember the pictures of protesters on Beijing's Square of Heavenly Peace being rolled over by tanks. The results were many dead and seriously wounded victims, mostly students. And I'm not sure whether or not this could happen again. And that's why it is so important that we have the cultural bridge and that we step in there. We need to stress the importance of tolerance, human rights, and democratic structures. But by reminding alone, we would be lonely callers in the wilderness. And this is why we really need the cultural diplomacy and foreign education policy. In combination with our economic policy, we can trust on solid pillars, solid pillars that form the German foreign policy. I already mentioned some of the instruments before. In 2011, Minister for Foreign Affairs Guido Westerwelle introduced a new concept of foreign cultural policy and education policy. The concept aims to win new partners, share our values, and, yes, to pursue also our interests. The concept targets on strengthening Europe in a rapidly changing world and shape globalization. It is important for us to win new partners without leaving old friends behind. The probably most visible project to win new partners were the so-called Deutschlandjahre, first in China, then in India, Russia, and now in Brazil. We were able to extend and to strengthen our partner networks in those countries and deepen our friendship. Promoting the intercultural dialogue is a powerful tool to strengthen civil societies and to ease conflict situations. Germany and the EU are convinced that the intercultural diplomacy contributes to crisis prevention, conflict resolution, and peace policy. Examples are partnership programs in the education systems, training programs for journalists, or sport cooperation programs. And this leads me to another cornerstone to build up tolerance, team spirit, and fairness. The international promotion and sponsoring of sports by the German government is understood as help for self-help. Concerning this cooperation, my country runs on two parallel tracks. One track is the support of long-term local training education in foreign countries. The other track is focusing on short-term training units for foreign staff in German facilities. There are also, for example, football or soccer summer camps in the US, and this is a mutual exchange. One thing is for sure, supporting sports is a major contribution among the understanding of peoples. It supports the understanding of each other's culture and strengthens an international dialogue. In this context, let me say a few words regarding the crown jewel of all sport events, the Olympic Games. The Olympic Games have already had a unique value for international relations and for meeting the youth of the world, of course. But the positive political influence by the Olympics concerning the compliance of human rights, for example, is often overestimated. And one does not need to mention the Olympics in 1936, which blinded the world of a system. Yes, we know all this. We don't need to deepen this, but I'm also talking of the boycott of the Olympics in 1980 due to the Soviet invasion in Afghanistan. We remember this did not force the Soviets to withdraw their troops, but left behind disappointed young athletes who could not take part in the Games. Granting the Olympics to Beijing did not improve the situation for dissidents very much. Neither could we see a significant change concerning human rights. The choice of venue for the Olympic Games should be liberated by these illusions. We should rather be more careful by choosing the country in the first place. And I guess, but that's my guess, This is why Istanbul was not chosen for the Olympics in 2020. And again, it's my guess. But what is indispensable to do when we want to do something for our youth on our common future? Until now, I spoke mainly about improving education and the use of sports as an instrument for cultural understanding. Or to put it in a nutshell, mens sana in corpore sano. In the end, all this is of no help if we aren't able to open perspectives and job opportunities for young people. The financial crisis opened a huge gap in our economic system, and it is still not overcome. As if that was not enough, we still deal with a severe euro crisis within the eurozone that caused tremendous pressure on the job market. If we take a look at Spain, for example, we see how especially young people are affected by high unemployment. And here we can see very clearly the benefits from the free movement of workers within the EU. The driver who brought me here, he's from Greece, and just like that, he can come to Germany or, for example, to Great Britain or whatever, and he hasn't to face that his degrees are not recognized, or, for example, he has to ask for visa and all these things. He just can move within the EU wherever he wants to work. That's a good example. Many well-trained young people come to Germany, where we lack qualified employees. That is another example for how important it is to recognize foreign degrees and academic titles. We are on the way, but we haven't accomplished it, but we are on the way to do that, and that's absolutely necessary. And also from beyond the borders of the EU, of course. Keep in mind that there are many countries on the globe where young people are on their way to become the majority. But when we talk about young people here, even the mid-30s or the 40s feel addressed. That's the case in Germany, in Europe as well, but also I think in other countries of the Northern Hemisphere. It has to do with the demographic factor. In an interconnected world, one cannot hold on geographic borders. The young people will not stand still when somebody tries to betray them for their future, of their future. Keep in mind that it were the young people who put the Mubarak regime down, and they know it. Again, it were mainly the young people in Turkey who demonstrated against the authoritarian regime under Erdogan. I'm convinced we will face more protests in both countries. Not with tear gas or worse. One will overcome the situation in the long run. To listen carefully, to be open for dialogue, and a little less stubbornness of the older generation is necessary. Even though it might be a little tough sometimes, we don't have any choice. Young people are our common future. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your kind attention.
Excellent. Thank you very, very much, Ms. Daub, for a very thought-provoking and inspiring presentation. I would ask you to please stay on the stage for a few moments. Would it be possible if we had some questions and discussion from the audience?
Of course.
That would be great. And this is your chance to really ask any questions that you might have, or also pose comments. And as I said, we really hope this will be the beginnings of a truly multilateral discussion. I would ask everyone if you could please, when you speak, stand, since we're video recording this. Also briefly introduce yourself, just your name, where you're from, and then pose the question. Thank you.
My name is Sergei Ponomaryov. I'm from Moscow. I'm
sorry for my remarks, but it was necessary.
I work in the Institute for Biomedical Problems. It's connected with the space medicine. We have a lot of contacts with Europe, with DLR, for example. We work in space exploration together. And I want to ask you a question. What do you think about the wiser constellation between Russia and Europe? Because, for example, for me and for other people, I think it's really not so good to take to the embassy, to take the visa, and to spend a lot of time there in obtaining the visa. And if we cancel the visa between Russia and Europe, I think it will be a good bridge, a new bridge between Europe and Russia. What do you think about it? Thank you.
Let me answer the last remark you made about the visa. As Mr. Donfried introduced me, I was working for tourism, and I was also in that committee for tourism. The best thing to do a lot for tourism is to ease the visa politics in a lot of countries, and so it is also between Russia and Europe. You asked me for the relations between Europe and Russia. I mentioned here a little bit the bad examples, but of course we know, and I think the Russians know, we know, the Europeans, we need another. We can't exist without another, and as we are living in an interconnected world, of course, we have to overcome these, let me say, negative things, like I think it's now 4 weeks ago when the American president and the Russian president met to talk about this asylum thing of Edward Snowden. There are also some ruptures in the connections between the two countries, but we have to overcome it. We are in an interconnected world and we need each other, and Russia is our neighbor and Europe is the neighbor of Russia. But the visa politics is very, very important, I think.
Thank you very much. Okay, we'll go to the other side of the room.
My name is Mamadou Kone. I'm originally from Mali. I've been living in Austria for over 18 years. I have two parts in my questions. The first one is related to the United Nations itself. And we see that in history, the United Nations has used other means, embargo, which has not been effective because
That's right.
the civil society is much more effective than the policy itself. And a nation, an organization with the most powerful country in the world is still not initiating dialogue within nations and try to negotiate on another principle to convince, had he been dictators or whatever regime it is, instead of giving way to bombing people. The second point is referring to Europe itself, political Europe, European Union. If we read the accession to the European Union, it states, I will paraphrase, state of law, democratic values, and economic. Now, referring back again to the foundation of the European Union itself, the political theorists, Gudenhofer, Kalergi, to Aristide Briand, they focus more on common culture. They base their theory, their thesis on common culture. But now, this common culture has been overshadowed by economic interest. Now, would it be interesting today, in the 21st century, to highlight cultural dialogue between nations at the preamble of the European Union itself? Thank you.
Thank you. Concerning the embargoes, they never helped really to enhance a situation, a difficult situation in different countries. Because, as you mentioned, it was the population, the own population of that state who suffered under the embargoes. And that's not something we should do, we want to do. Let me come to Europe. Yes, I think when the EU, the name now is EU, it started with EW and so on. The idea was a political and a cultural. It was a post-World War situation. And there was a strong sense that we can't continue in Europe as we did in the past. And so it started with 6 nations. Now we are, I think, 27, 28. With Croatia, 28. But there has always been the question, I don't know whether or not it is in other European countries as well, but in Germany it is, what do we have from the EU? We are paying and paying, but what do we have? And I think that was the point where also the leaders emphasized the economic value, what we had from the EU as a very much exporting nation, and which benefits we have from the EU. That was a point that the economic values overlapped the ideal, the cultural values. But you are absolutely right, we have to go back to the cultural values because there are many states who try to imitate the EU. Let's talk about the ASEAN. Let's talk about Kazakhstan, Russia, and Weißrussland.
White Russia?
White Russia, yeah. White Russia or NAFTA, for example, on the other side of Atlantic. That's really only the economy. They don't have the bridging idea the European have. And we have to go back to that and not let overlap the economy, the cultural things. Did it answer your question?
Not really.
Not really, oh.
I'm sorry, because the reason the 6 countries you mentioned right now gather was based on security, so that what happened during the First World and the Second should not happen again.
Yeah.
And the credit we have to give to European Union today is the 70 years of security peace in Europe. Now, which concrete approach has the community undertaken to highlight the cultural values so that more focus is based on that? Because now, the younger generation you were talking about, they hardly find their way in the economical systems all around the 28 countries. They do not find their way in the system. But in field of culture, they will have their creativity. They will have their inspiration to generate something which will be common to all. Now, concrete question is, any active approach undertaken by the European Union regarding fostering this common culture? Not speaking about Erasmus. Not speaking about Erasmus.
No, I know. But most of the instruments I mentioned in the speech, they are also on the way in Europe, in the European states. And these are cultural instruments, let alone the vocational training and these things. But Deutsche Welle, and most of them I mentioned are on the way in the European Union. But there is one difficulty. We are talking about 28 states. And all these states do have their own interests, their own ideas, how their government governs in their state. We are not, I'm talking now about Germany because that I know best. We are not always happy when the EU, for example, says us in Germany what we have to do. And again, there are a lot of cultural instruments, and most of them I mentioned are on the way in Europe, but it's overlapped by this or these discussions. And again, I don't know how it is in other European countries. I'm talking about Germany, and there we really have these debates. Let me mention the light bulbs. Which light bulbs we have to use. Then, of course, people ask, what does the EU say as they don't have to rule these things? There are energy politics, for example. It's not cultural, I know, but that would be a field where the EU is needed to act, because energy supply can't be national, must be worldwide, must be Europe-wide. Kissinger said, tell me the phone number of the EU, and that's still our difficulty.
Yes, David de Groot from the Netherlands. The problem, I think, with Europe and the EU and culture is that the EU has only a facilitating possibility due to, I think it's Article 5 TFEU, where it says the EU can only supplement and aid the member states in order to create a common culture. And well, the DG for, I think it's youth education and culture has quite a lot of programs, although I'm not sure whether they are used enough because a lot of people just don't know about it. I actually still had a question. You stated something about Germany still needs a lot of skilled labor. How about the Blue Card Directive? It was created in order to facilitate skilled labor from third countries to come to the EU, and I think it's now been in force for about 2 years. Do you know how well it worked?
Sorry, can't tell you, but if you want the answer, I'm going to ask and give you the answer, and you can ask Mr. Donfried how well it works. I don't know, but I think it was the right thing to do. It was absolutely the right thing to do, that skilled workers who come to us from beyond the EU borders, well, here I come again, what I mentioned, with a mutual recognition also of titles and degrees. We are on the way. It's not fully accomplished. I know that. And about this program, I tell Mr. Donfried how well it works. 2 years, that's not a long time. And to mention that, I think maybe we have too many programs. We have programs for all and everything, and people don't know about the programs, companies don't know about the programs, and even politicians don't know about all the programs. And that's also one thing which has to improve, maybe by diminishing the programs or to concentrate them.
Thank you
But
very
I think in Netherlands you have the same problems as we face in Germany.
Thank you very much. We're actually a little bit over time, but if I may, I just want to ask you a very brief question as a final question regarding cultural diplomacy and the transatlantic relations. A member of our advisory board, you may know him, Alexander Lagoulias, a politician also based here in Berlin. He's now head of the Checkpoint Charlie Foundation. And he's known for a quote he said once, where he said, Mark, relationships are not like light switches that you can turn on and off when you need them. You need to send at least a Christmas card once a year. And he was talking about the German-American relations with that analogy, where many Germans feel at the end of the Cold War, the Americans turned off the light switch, and they basically said, okay, mission accomplished. We won the Cold War. No more need for culture diplomacy. They closed all of the America houses, and in many ways really pulled back with culture diplomacy. They closed down the United States Information Service, shifted it all into the State Department, and so many in Germany, I think, at least for a while, had a feeling, okay, they kind of left. And I think you really sensed this, especially in the last American administration, where you had a number of disagreements also between Germany and the US. So my question is culture diplomacy still needed in, let's say, such a good relationship between Germany and the US? Or is culture diplomacy really more needed, more relevant in conflict zones? So is there a need for cultural diplomacy between, let's say, USA and Germany? I could ask you a second part of that question with the United Kingdom and Germany. The British Council, about 6 years ago, totally shut down their British Council in Berlin. They used to have a big one on Hackescher Markt, a 5-story building you may have seen right on Hackescher Markt, great part of town. They reopened a much smaller office in Alexanderplatz, 1 floor closed to the public, more or less with the same rationale. Germany doesn't need the British Council. We should really be in Africa and Asia, etc. On the one hand, that makes perfect sense. On the other hand, I'm wondering, what kind of cultural diplomacy do you think might be needed amongst friends or amongst partners? Just as a question, as a German, also somebody who has, I think, experienced different chapters of the transatlantic relations.
You speak very quickly, Mr. Donfried, but I try.
Should I recap the key points?
I try to answer, and if it doesn't hit your question, please ask again. Of course, we need the cultural diplomacy, US and Germany more than ever, because there have many irritations between the two countries. I'm a post-World War child. My great uncle emigrated in the 30s to the US, and nobody here will remember, of course, but I still remember how happy we were in my family when the care parcels arrived. And when I have to say this, even if we are over time, when I was a child going to the kindergarten, I had to cross the street once. And on one side there was a kindergarten, and of the other side the headquarters of the Americans in our town, because I lived in southern part of Germany where the US troops were based. And it was every morning a soldier who was on guard who took me over the street, and in the afternoon when I went back, oh, little girl, wait, I come, and he guided me to the other part of the street. So what I'm going to say is, I'm very grateful to the US. Nonetheless, the irritations that have been there. And when there was the Bush regime, I think that was your point as well, I always said to my companions, Bush is not America. But well, there are still irritations, and I hope we overcome these irritations. Coming back to the German diplomacy or government, I'm not positive if the anti-American feelings, which are still on the way, Social Democrats, the Green, and the left, they are there. One can't deny. If they will vanish in a very short time. We have to do all we can do that it diminishes. And I think your president now is a good example that we are really interconnected and we can work again together. And of course, we need our diplomats. It's a little bit harder with the Brits. Can't tell you why. In a complete different way with the US, but with them it's a little bit harder. There is still some kind, even if they are in the EU, and we know the difficulties we face with them, there's still some kind of splendid isolation. Yes, and that's the reason why we need the cultural exchange and we need our diplomats. Not the diplomats going to Washington, D.C. and the other ones to Berlin, fine place, or to London, nice place to see. No, for strengthening the relations between the countries.